I've been working in the restaurant for over a year now, and when I went to my shift that evening, I didn't know it would be my last. And I had no idea that at that moment someone was watching what was happening behind the door. It turns out that sometimes you don't need to be alone to overcome fear. You just have to be ready to tell the truth. My name is Sophia, and I have been working at a Lisa restaurant for over a year. This place is like a refuge. For me and for many who work here, it has become more than just a job. Here I could feel like a part of something big. But that evening, everything changed. Ever since Rick Calloway became our manager, the atmosphere at Alicia has changed. We used to all be a team, but now it's become a place where everyone is afraid to say too much because Rick likes to keep everyone under control. His eyes on us at every step makes us feel like we're under a magnifying glass. He's always watching, always waiting for a mistake. This evening was ordinary, at first. I was already preparing for a crazy evening, because it was Saturday, the night when our restaurant is most crowded. Apparently, this has already become a routine. We were all running around the kitchen, delivering food to the tables, pouring drinks, smiling at customers until they demanded something new. But I couldn't shake this depressing feeling I'd had for weeks, as if there was some unpleasant cloud in the air. And then I heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound, like a small buzzing. It was only at the end of my shift, when I was alone at the bar, that I realized it wasn't just noise. It was crying. I turned around and saw Lena, one of the new girls, leaning on the metal surface, her shoulders shaking and her face hidden between her hands. She was trying not to break down, but I could see her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if looking for support, and her movements were completely hopeless. Lena? I approached her quietly, watching her try to hold back her tears. She flinched when she heard my name and quickly raised her head, trying to hide her emotions, but I could see in her eyes all the pain she was trying to hide. Are you okay? I asked, even though I knew the answer. There was not just sadness in her eyes, there was fear. Fear that I had seen before in the eyes of other workers when they were afraid to say a word. But Lena just couldn't seem to keep quiet any longer. I can't take it anymore. Her voice was barely audible, but it was enough to make me realize that it wasn't that simple. Her coworker, Tim, was standing next to her, looking equally embarrassed, though he tried to hide it. I saw him take a drag and come over to me. Sophie, she's just worried, he said, but that wasn't what I heard in his voice. It was the voice of a man who was afraid. What's wrong? I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Something is wrong here. Something bad was happening, and I had to find out what. Tim looked at Lena, then at me. He was silent, and then, unable to contain himself, he whispered, He ordered her to stay. Just her. Everyone else has already left, and she's supposed to stay after closing time. Again, a chill went through my body. It wasn't just overwork. It was manipulation. Fear. I've seen these situations before. I know what it is. And now I understood why Lena was so confused. She had no choice. She couldn't just quit her job. But what was happening now was not just a work situation. It was a trap. He's making her stay after work? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Yeah, Tim answered, his voice barely audible. He says it's for her own good, for her development, but we all know it's not. She's alone in the office, and he starts talking to her in ways that are not normal. All the options were running through my head. I knew who was behind everything. Rick Calloway. He was the one who always put himself above everyone else. And every time I saw him, I felt worse. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Lena sighed nervously. He said that if I didn't stay, I would be fired. But I can't do this anymore. Her words were interrupted by excitement, and I could see her hands shaking even more. Tim looked at me, and his eyes were full of anxiety, as if he was waiting for me to make a decision. I could see that he couldn't change anything. Lena could not escape. She was a hostage to her situation, and I knew I couldn't let it go on. However, before I could say more, someone walked down the hall and I heard a familiar voice. Rick Calloway. He was right next to me. I clenched my fists. At that moment, one thing became clear to me. If I left it like this, nothing would change. He was controlling everything, even our employees. He was playing with their lives, and I couldn't take it anymore. If I didn't stop him now, this could become our new normal. When I heard his voice, it was a real cold reality. Rick Calloway, our manager, the same man who created an atmosphere of constant fear in our restaurant, was standing at the door of the corridor. I felt every cell in my body tense up, as if it were ready for a fight. I also realized that I couldn't just stand there and watch. Lena took a step back, immediately figuring out how to justify herself, how to say something to him, and I stood there, not wanting to show my weakness. Rick was approaching again, his shadows becoming more and more threatening. "Is everything okay?" he asked, and his voice was so smooth it was nauseating. He didn't even try to hide his superiority. Rick liked to keep everyone under control, especially us, those who were afraid of losing their jobs. I decided to take action. "Yes, everything is fine," I said in a voice that sounded much more confident than I actually felt. I turned to Lena and touched her hand, as if trying to tell her that everything would be okay. She looked at me and nodded, her eyes full of doubt but also hope. Rick was still standing in front of us, studying us from head to toe. I couldn't take it anymore. My gaze turned cold as I said, "We're just discussing one of the details of the job." He frowned, although he pretended to be fine. "Work details, huh?" he repeated, his eyes drilling into me as if trying to sense if I was lying. At that moment, I realized that he didn't trust his employees at all. He was just waiting for someone to break. But I had no intention of giving up. I couldn't let Lena or anyone else fall victim to his manipulations. "We work together, Rick," I said calmly, trying to let him know that I wouldn't be afraid. But the more I looked at him, the more I realized that this man had already done a lot of evil in this restaurant. I turned to Lena, quietly, so that only she could hear me. "You don't have to stay. If he continues to torture you like this, we will fix it." Lena looked at me, and I saw her shoulders relax, if only for a moment. She felt supported, but it was not enough. Rick was standing there like a pillar, ready to capture our every move. "I understand," she said softly, but her voice was full of anxiety. But I didn't let her finish. Lena was afraid, and I knew she needed support to overcome this barrier. "There is no but. I'm with you," I said, standing firmly, as if this was not just a conversation, but a challenge. A challenge that I was ready to accept. Rick, seeing that I was not afraid, stepped one step closer, his voice sharp as a knife blade. "Sophie, what are you doing? This is unacceptable. She has to work like everyone else." I turned to him, a direct look in my eyes. "We're not here to suffer, Rick. And you know that very well. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to what's going on in this restaurant." He smiled, but there was nothing sincere about it. It was the smile of someone who was used to power. "Are you telling me I can't run my own restaurant?" His voice became even colder. He was ready for a fight. I knew I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "I'm not saying you can't, but if your methods are humiliation and manipulation of people, then you have no right to be here." Anger flashed in his eyes, but he said nothing. His gaze became even more threatening as he took a few steps back and then turned to us. "Lena, go home. They'll talk to you later." "And you, Sophie, stay," Rick said, but his voice was much less confident than before. Lena nodded slowly, albeit apprehensively, and I remained standing. I could feel my fingers clenching into a fist. My neck was tense, but I knew it was up to me now. I couldn't stop. As Lena left and Rick remained standing in front of me, I realized that he was trying to find a way to turn the situation in his favor, but I wasn't going to let him do it anymore. Now that everything was on the line, I was ready to come out of this game a winner. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't get away with it. And when he took me to his office to talk, I was ready for him to have no more chances for manipulation. We walked down the hall, and his footsteps sounded like a drumbeat. Rick could not stand it and finally started talking, trying to maintain his confidence, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He doesn't like to be challenged, and I could feel it in his every move. "You don't understand, Sophie. This is my job. I'm in control here. I have the right to run the business as I see fit. People come and go, but I stay." His words seemed to be an attempt to convince me, but he didn't even notice that it only made him feel more guilty. When we entered his office, I immediately noticed that he locked the door behind him. It was cramped in the office, and even if I didn't want to see his eyes, I could still feel it. Fear, treachery, and even some helplessness as he stood in front of me, trying to keep his cool. "I hope you don't want to complicate things, Sophie?" he asked with such an expression on his face that I would have thought he was trying to convince himself, not me. I wasn't going to give him a chance. "You're not complicating the situation, Rick. You're creating it. And I'm not going to stop until I tell everyone about you." My hand clenched on the phone in my pocket. Now he was going to hear everything I had found out. He raised his eyebrows, surprised and maybe even a little scared, though he tried not to show it. "What do you mean?" His voice became more restrained, but I could see that his anger was starting to rise. I didn't answer. I just took out my phone and pressed the record button. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply, noticing what I was doing. But I was already pressing the button, and from the moment I heard Lena's first words, I realized that I had exactly what I needed. Proof. A recording that clearly showed Lena and Tim talking about how he makes Lena stay after closing time, how he uses his power and fear to subdue others, how he makes her believe that if she doesn't follow his orders, she will lose her job. "You can't do this, Sophie," Rick shouted desperately when he heard his voice on the recording. He began to fidget nervously with his desk handle. His expression changed, and I could no longer see the confident man who had been trying to control the situation a few minutes earlier. He was shy and frightened. "I'm calling corporate HR right now," I said, ready to press the call button. He saw my intention and instantly grabbed his chair. "Don't you dare. You can't." His voice was getting more and more agitated. I looked at him, and it was not just an angry perception of the situation. It was a fight for justice, a fight for every person he was humiliating. "I can do this, Rick. Because you don't control this place anymore. They'll stop you." He closed his eyes, seemed to be having trouble breathing, as if all the pressure he had created here was now crashing down on him. And I knew I couldn't go back. "You have no right to bully people," I said firmly. "You made her afraid. You used your position to manipulate her. It's not only wrong, it's a crime." Rick remained silent, his lips trembling and his hands nervously fumbling on the table. I realized that he could no longer keep up the facade. He knew he had lost. I didn't mean for it to happen this way," he finally said, but his voice was so weak and shaky that he no longer sounded like someone who was used to power. He knew that what he had done was inexcusable. I wasn't going to listen to his excuses. I pressed the call button to corporate HR. When I got back to Lena, she was standing in the hallway, looking a little less nervous, but still agitated. I looked at her and smiled, letting her know that everything was going to be okay now. "You did it," Lena said, looking at me with gratitude but also doubt. She may still not have believed that the situation had changed, but I could sense that her fear had diminished. Calloway was no longer who he was, and I knew that now all of us, colleagues, employees of this restaurant, had a chance for a new beginning. I went back to Calloway's office, and he didn't try to stop me again. All his manipulations did not matter when we chose the path of justice. And yes, I didn't just talk about him. I made sure that his power no longer had any force. Rick could no longer imagine how he would return to the control he had before. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened to all of us. I left his office, feeling the atmosphere around me change. All these weeks I had been hiding my fear, my doubts, trying to give Lena hope, but now I realized that you can't make someone feel safe if you don't. When I approached Lena and Tim, I saw their eyes widen. They couldn't believe I had actually done it. It may sound brave, but I went for it with every fiber of my being. I couldn't take this vicious circle of fear anymore. "It's okay," I said to Lena as I approached her. Her eyes were filled with emotions, doubt, fear, but also a rare hope. She looked at me, not knowing if she still believed in her safety, and I knew I couldn't let her down. Tim also looked shocked, but his eyes were full of gratitude. "You have no idea how much this means to us. We thought nothing would ever change." I leaned over and took Lena's hand. "It has, and this is just the beginning. You are no longer alone. No one will be alone in these walls anymore." We didn't say much, but those few words were important to each of us. When I returned to the restaurant, all eyes were on me. The staff, who had felt helpless just a few minutes ago, now looked at me as a symbol of change. And I knew I couldn't stop now. But this was only the beginning. Now I had to do what I had promised, cleanse the restaurant of corruption and fear. Everything that happened was no longer just about Lena or Rick. It became a question of our entire system. How often do we just accept toxic conditions because we don't know what to do? How often do we forget that we have the right to dignity? I went to the main hall where all the employees had gathered. Some of the employees still looked doubtful, but now they were looking at me instead of Rick. "I want you all to know," I said loudly, and everyone silently turned their gazes to me. "This is not just about Lena or Rick. This is about all of us. We will no longer work in an atmosphere of fear. We will no longer tolerate disrespect." I paused, giving everyone in the room time to realize the importance of the moment. Each of us has the power to change the situation, and no longer will we be allowed to support wrong practices. I will launch an investigation, and from this moment on, anyone who feels they are being violated has the right to speak up, and we will act. Yes, I know it's scary, but I am here to support you. The room was filled with silence, and then I heard a few whispers. Maybe they were voices of hope or maybe of fear, but what I said was important. I knew that some people would need time to realize that change had actually happened, but I was ready to fight for them. We will not tolerate this anymore, I said finally. If any of you are facing this, we will act together. Do not let yourself be told that you are not important. We all matter. I turned to Lena and Tim, and they finally smiled. They already knew it wasn't over, but everything had changed. We were no longer the underdogs. We were a team. The next few days were filled with calls, meetings, and conversations with HR. I sent the recordings I had received from Calloway's office for review, and there was no doubt that things had taken a turn for the worse. Rick Calloway was no longer just the manager of the Elisa restaurant. He was the subject of an investigation, and even his self-confidence could not change that. Every day the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. At first, people walked around with their heads down, wary of every glance, but now smiles appeared on the faces of the employees. Small victories were becoming big ones. And most importantly, we started to feel like a team again. There was no more constant tension. There was no longer this oppressive feeling that your every move was controlled by someone who did not understand what real leadership was. I thought a lot about those few weeks that had passed. Every day was a struggle. A struggle not only for Lena, not only for justice. I realized that it was a fight for our right to be respected. It was a fight for people not to forget that they are not just numbers on paper, not just laborers who have to follow orders. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone has the right to be heard. On one of those evenings, after Calloway was officially fired, I was sitting in the main hall of the restaurant when Lena came up to me. She looked calmer than I had seen her in months. Her eyes were no longer hidden by fear, and her smile, though trembling, was genuine. "I want to thank you," she said quietly, sitting down next to me. "I thought it was impossible, that I would never get out of this situation. You saved me." I looked at her and smiled. Her words meant a lot to me, but I didn't want her to feel guilty or obligated. "You don't have to thank me, Lena. This is not only my victory, it's a victory for all of us. We all did it together." Lena looked at me, and then her gaze changed to a more serious one. "You know, Sophie, I always thought it was natural to be weak. I thought that if I kept quiet, it would be easier. But now I realize that real strength is speaking up, even when you're scared." These words reminded me that we often limit ourselves out of fear. Sometimes we allow others to put pressure on us, forgetting that we have the right to freedom of choice. But change did not happen overnight. After we fired Calloway, the investigation continued, and I started working with a new manager who supported the changes. I personally checked how each department was working, held meetings with the staff to see if any new problems were arising. My goal was to make the restaurant a place where every employee feels important and heard. And I was ready to fight for it to the end. A few weeks later, I received a message from HR that Rick Calloway had been completely expelled from the restaurant industry. His accusations of sexual harassment and manipulation had been substantiated, and he was facing consequences. I knew it wouldn't make things immediately better, but it was an important step forward. The first step to start changing the system that allowed such people to reach heights where they could abuse their power. It was a turning point. I realized that the fight for justice never ends. But every step towards victory becomes important because it changes something in the world around us. In a world where silence should not be a choice. In a world where the truth has power. When I stood on the threshold of the Elisa restaurant that night, I saw the changes. I saw Lena, Tim, and the other employees starting a new chapter in their lives. There was no longer this shadow of fear over them. They could look each other in the eye without shame. They could work without feeling powerless. I clenched my fists, not in anger, but in determination. My fight had just begun. And I knew one thing. We, the people, must be ready to stand up for our rights. This is the only way we can change this world for the better.